I never thought signing up to help my neighbors would turn into the most absurd power trip I had ever witnessed. But here I was, standing in my driveway at 5 in the morning during a blizzard, staring at a text message that made my blood boil hotter than any furnace could manage in this weather. My name is Quentin Hayes, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook community in suburban Denver, Colorado, for about 3 years. The place was nice enough when I moved in, with tree-lined streets, well-maintained lawns, and the kind of quiet that made you forget you were still technically in a city. I worked from home as a software engineer, which gave me flexibility most people did not have. That flexibility, I would soon learn, was both a blessing and a curse when dealing with people who had way too much time on their hands. The Meadowbrook Homeowners Association was run by a woman named Patricia Cunningham, a 52-year-old former real estate agent who treated the HOA presidency like it was a Fortune 500 company. She had short blonde hair that she kept in that aggressive soccer mom style, always wore pantsuits even to casual neighborhood meetings, and spoke with the kind of artificial authority that made you want to do the exact opposite of whatever she said. Her two right-hand women were Susan Miller and Deborah Kent, both cut from the same cloth, always nodding along to whatever Patricia declared as if she was handing down commandments from on high. I had volunteered 6 months ago to be part of the community snow removal team. It seemed like a good idea at the time. I had a heavy-duty snowblower, I was in decent shape, and helping out elderly neighbors during Colorado winters felt like the right thing to do. The arrangement was simple. During significant snowfall, volunteers would help clear the main walkways and driveways of residents who could not do it themselves, primarily the elderly or disabled folks in our community. We had about 8 volunteers total, and it rotated based on availability. The system worked fine until Patricia decided she needed to optimize it, which really meant she wanted to control every aspect of it. She created a spreadsheet, assigned specific routes, demanded check-ins via a group chat, and started treating volunteers like employees. The other volunteers started dropping out one by one, citing the absurdity of having someone micromanage charity work. By the time January rolled around, only 3 of us remained. Myself, a retired teacher named George who lived 2 streets over, and a younger guy named Marcus who was built like he could throw a car but had the patience of a saint. The text message that morning came at 4:53 a.m. I know the exact time because I took a screenshot, figuring I might need evidence of this insanity later. It read, "Quentin, storm intensifying. Need you to handle Route A, Route B, and the HOA office walkways. George is sick, Marcus is out of town." This is a mandatory volunteer duty as per Community Guidelines Section 7.3. Begin immediately. I sat on the edge of my bed, reading it 3 times to make sure I was not hallucinating. Mandatory volunteer duty. Those 3 words were so contradictory they almost formed a black hole of stupidity. I texted back, "Patricia, I can do Route A, which is my normal assignment. Route B and the office are beyond what I signed up for. That is about 6 hours of work in this weather." Her response came within 30 seconds, which meant she had been sitting there waiting, probably watching the volunteer group chat like a hawk monitoring prey. Section 7.3 clearly states all volunteers must fulfill duties as assigned during emergencies. This is an emergency. The office walkways must be cleared by 8 a.m. for staff arrival. I typed and deleted about 4 different responses, each one more colorful than the last. Finally, I settled on, "What staff? The HOA office is open 2 days a week and today is not one of them. I will be there. Susan will be there. We have important meetings." I looked outside at the blizzard that was coating everything in white. The weather service had issued warnings about travel. Schools were closed. Most businesses were shut down. But Patricia and Susan had important meetings that required someone to shovel their walkways at dawn during a dangerous storm. I called George, waking him up in the process. He answered with a cough that sounded like his lungs were trying to escape his body. "Quentin, what is wrong?" "Nothing. Sorry to wake you. Patricia said you were sick, just wanted to check on you. Been down with this cold for 3 days. Told her yesterday I could not help with the storm." He coughed again. "She give you grief about it. She wants me to cover your route plus do the office walkways." George was quiet for a moment, then laughed, which turned into more coughing. "That woman is unbelievable. You know she tried to fine me $50 last month for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day. They blew out from the side of my house during wind. I did not even know until she sent the letter." We talked for a few more minutes before I let him go rest. I sat there in my bedroom, watching the snow come down in sheets, and made a decision. I got dressed in my heavy winter gear, went out to my garage and fired up my snowblower. Then I spent the next 2.5 hours clearing Route A, which consisted of 4 elderly residents' driveways and walkways. Mrs. Chen, who was 87 and lived alone, actually cried when she saw me finishing up her driveway. That made it worth it. Mr. and Mrs. Patterson brought me hot chocolate in a thermos. That made it worth it. The Rodriguez family, whose father had MS and whose mother worked night shifts as a nurse, left a thank you note on their door. That made it worth it. What did not make it worth it was the 17 text messages from Patricia demanding to know why I had not started on Route B or the office yet. By 7:30 a.m., I was exhausted, freezing despite my layers, and completely done. I pulled out my phone, opened the HOA volunteer group chat, and typed, "Effective immediately. I am resigning from the snow removal volunteer team. Thank you to the residents I was able to help. Best of luck with future storms." I sent it before I could second-guess myself. Then I went home, took a hot shower that lasted about 40 minutes, and made myself a massive breakfast of eggs, bacon, hash browns, and toast. I was halfway through my second cup of coffee when my phone started ringing. "Patricia." I declined the call. She called again. Declined. Text message: "You cannot quit during an active emergency. This is abandonment of duty." I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen, because the absurdity had reached levels that should not be possible. I typed back, "I am a volunteer. There is no duty to abandon. Find someone else to shovel your office walkway." My phone rang again. This time it was Susan. Declined. Then a number I did not recognize. Declined. Finally, I just put my phone on Do Not Disturb and decided to enjoy my day off. The snow was still coming down heavy, and the entire city was basically shut down. I settled onto my couch with my laptop to catch up on some personal projects, occasionally glancing out my window at the winter wonderland forming in my yard. Around 10 a.m., my doorbell rang. I knew who it was before I even got up. Through the peephole, I could see Patricia and Susan standing on my porch, both looking like they had just walked through the aforementioned blizzard, which they had. I opened the door but left the screen door latched. "Quentin, we need to talk about this morning," Patricia said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Nothing to talk about. I resigned. I completed my normal route to help the people who need it, then I resigned." "You made a commitment to this community," Susan chimed in. She was wearing a white parka that was now covered in snow, making her look like a very angry snowman. "You cannot just walk away." "I can, and I did. I volunteered to help elderly and disabled neighbors. I did not volunteer to be on call 24/7 for whatever you decide needs shoveling." Patricia's face was turning red, which was impressive given the cold. The HOA office is community property. The walkways there serve everyone. The office is barely open and you two are the only ones who use it regularly. Shovel it yourselves. That is not our responsibility. We manage the community, Patricia said, as if that explained everything. And I write software, but I still have to shovel my own driveway. I started to close the door. Enjoy the rest of your day. Wait, Patricia snapped. We are not done here. Actually, we are. I am not a volunteer anymore. You have no authority over me beyond the standard HOA rules about property maintenance, which my property is in full compliance with. Have a good day. I closed the door on her protests and watched through the window as they stood there for another minute before trudging back through the snow to Patricia's black SUV. They sat in it for a while, probably calling other people or plotting their next move. Eventually, they drove off, the SUV fishtailing slightly in the fresh snow. The rest of the day was peaceful. I worked on my projects, made lunch, and watched the snow continue to pile up. The storm was not supposed to let up until late that evening, and we were projected to get about 16 inches total. Around 3 p.m., I took a break and checked my phone. I had 63 messages in various group chats and text threads. The main HOA community group chat was on fire. Patricia had posted, "Due to volunteer abandonment during this emergency, several community areas remain uncleared. We are looking for able-bodied residents to assist with the HOA office complex, Route B walkways, and main entrance areas. This is a community crisis, and we need everyone to pitch in." The responses were not what she expected. Most people were pointing out that the entire city was shut down, that it was dangerous to be out, and that maybe the HOA office could wait a day. A few people asked why the HOA did not have a contracted snow removal service like most professional organizations. One person, bless them, pointed out that demanding volunteers work during dangerous conditions, and then calling it abandonment when they quit, was absolutely ridiculous. Patricia responded to that one directly. "We have always relied on community volunteers. It builds neighborhood spirit. Professional services are expensive and would require raising dues." Someone else jumped in. "I would rather pay an extra $20 a month than guilt people into dangerous work." The thread devolved from there, with Patricia getting more defensive and residents getting more frustrated. I stayed out of it, but I was taking screenshots of everything. Something told me I would need documentation of this whole situation. By the time the storm cleared that evening, the neighborhood looked like a Christmas card, everything buried under pristine white snow. I bundled up and went out to clear my own driveway and walkway, which took about an hour. Several neighbors were doing the same. I waved to a few people, had a brief conversation with the guy across the street about how crazy the accumulation was, and then went back inside. The next morning, the city's plows had been through the main roads, and life was slowly returning to normal. I had a video call scheduled with a client at 9 a.m., so I was at my desk with coffee when my doorbell rang at 8:45. This was becoming a pattern I did not appreciate. This time it was Deborah Kent, the third member of Patricia's Trinity. Deborah was probably 45, always wore too much makeup, and had a voice that could strip paint. I opened the door with a sigh. "Quentin, I am here on behalf of the HOA board," she began, holding a clipboard like it was a shield. "We are formally notifying you of a violation." "A violation of what?" Section 9.1 of the HOA bylaws. Failure to maintain community standards and contribute to neighborhood welfare. I stared at her. "You are trying to fine me for quitting a volunteer position. You abandoned your duties during an emergency, which put residents at risk and reflected poorly on our community. Name one resident who was put at risk. I completed my entire assigned route. Every single person I was supposed to help got helped. Deborah looked down at her clipboard, flustered. The HOA office was inaccessible for an entire day. That is not a resident. That is an office that is barely used. Try again. Route B was not completed. Route B is not my assignment. I did not abandon anything. I completed my assignment and then resigned. Do you understand how volunteering works? Her face pinched like she had bitten a lemon. The board is issuing a $200 fine for community neglect. You have 30 days to pay, or we will place a lien on your property. She handed me an official-looking letter and walked away before I could respond. I stood there, reading the letter, feeling my blood pressure rising with each word. It was full of legal-sounding language that basically said I had failed my community obligations and was being penalized accordingly. I immediately called my real estate attorney, a sharp woman named Rebecca Walsh, who I had used when buying the house. She listened to the whole story, asked me to email her the letter and any documentation I had, and then laughed. Quentin, this is one of the most absurd things I have seen, and I have seen HOAs try some creative stuff. They have absolutely no legal standing to fine you for quitting a volunteer position. That is what I thought, but I wanted to make sure. Send me everything you have. I will draft a response. In the meantime, do not pay that fine. Do not acknowledge it as valid. Just sit tight. I spent the next hour compiling everything. The text messages, screenshots of the group chats, my original volunteer agreement which very clearly stated it was voluntary and could be terminated by either party at any time, and the ridiculous fine letter. I sent it all to Rebecca and felt slightly better having a professional on my side. The community group chat continued to be entertaining. More people were questioning the HOA's handling of the situation, and Patricia was getting increasingly defensive. She posted a long message about how disappointed she was in the community's lack of spirit, how volunteers were essential to keeping dues low, and how certain people's selfish actions were undermining everything she had built. That last part was clearly about me, though she did not use my name. Several people defended me in the comments, pointing out that I had actually helped the people who needed it, and that the real issue was the HOA's poor planning and unreasonable expectations. One comment from a woman named Linda Johnson perfectly captured the mood. Maybe if the board spent less time micromanaging volunteers and more time actually organizing proper services, we would not have these problems. Just a thought. Patricia's response was to threaten a separate fine for inflammatory and disrespectful communication in official HOA channels. That went over about as well as expected, with multiple people calling her out for trying to police speech and acting like a tyrant. I was starting to realize that I was not the first person to have issues with Patricia and her board. The storm situation had just been the spark that ignited a lot of built-up resentment in the community. 2 days after the storm, Rebecca sent me her response letter to the HOA. It was beautiful, a professional dismantling of every claim they had made, complete with citations of Colorado HOA law, references to their own bylaws showing the volunteer program was optional, and a polite but firm statement that any attempt to collect the fine or place a lien would result in legal action against the board personally. Can they be held personally liable? I asked her over the phone. Absolutely. If board members act outside their authority or in bad faith, they can be sued as individuals. Most HOA insurance does not cover that, so it is a real risk for them. That is why my letter mentions it. Sometimes board members forget they are not untouchable. I authorized her to send the letter and waited for the fallout. It came faster than expected. That evening, Patricia called an emergency board meeting, which by HOA rules had to be open to all residents. The meeting was held in the community center, a small building near the main entrance that was used for neighborhood events. I almost did not go, but curiosity got the better of me. When I arrived, the room was packed. Apparently, a lot of other people were curious too. Patricia, Susan, and Deborah sat at a table at the front, looking uncomfortable with the turnout. There were about 40 residents in the audience, which was unheard of for a standard HOA meeting. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately went on the offensive. We have called this meeting to address the growing disrespect and lack of community engagement that has become apparent in recent days. The HOA board works tirelessly to maintain property values and quality of life in Meadowbrook, and we will not tolerate members who undermine that work. A hand shot up from the audience. It was Robert Martinez, whose family I had helped during the storm. "Are you talking about Quentin Hayes? Because he is the one who made sure my driveway was clear so my wife could get to work. She is a nurse. She had to work during the storm." "So maybe be specific about who you are attacking." Patricia's face tightened. "This is not about one person. This is about the principle of community commitment." "It sounds like it is about one person," someone else called out. "It sounds like you are mad that someone would not do extra work you demanded." The meeting devolved quickly from there. Multiple residents stood up to share their own stories of Patricia's overreach, unreasonable demands, and petty fines. One couple had been fined because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. Another person had received a violation notice because a contractor's truck was parked in front of their house for 3 hours during a renovation. Someone else had been threatened with fines because their child's basketball hoop was 6 inches over the property line into their own driveway. The stories kept coming, and Patricia kept trying to defend each one, but she was drowning. Susan and Deborah had gone quiet, clearly uncomfortable with being in the hot seat. I sat near the back, saying nothing, just watching the community I had lived in quietly for 3 years suddenly come alive with shared frustration. Finally, an older man I recognized as Thomas Wright, a retired attorney who lived in one of the larger houses on the hill, stood up. The room went quiet because Thomas had a presence about him that demanded attention. "Patricia, I have reviewed the HOA bylaws thoroughly, as I do periodically to ensure my rights are protected. I have also reviewed the volunteer program documentation and the fine issued to Mr. Hayes. What you have done is not only inappropriate but potentially illegal. You have attempted to compel labor through financial threat, which is a form of coercion. You have misused your authority as board president to pursue what appears to be a personal vendetta. And you have created liability for this HOA and potentially for yourselves personally." Patricia opened her mouth, but Thomas kept going. "I am calling for an immediate vote of no confidence in the current board leadership. Per our bylaws, 15% of homeowners can trigger a recall election. I have already collected signatures from 23% of our community in the past 2 days. We will be holding a recall vote within 30 days. The room erupted in conversation. Patricia looked like she had been slapped. Susan and Deborah were whispering urgently to each other. I caught Thomas's eye and he gave me a slight nod. Apparently, he had been busy. Patricia tried to regain control of the meeting, but it was pointless. People were energized now, talking among themselves, some coming up to Thomas to add their names to whatever petition he had going. After about 20 minutes of chaos, Patricia adjourned the meeting abruptly and the 3 board members left quickly. I made my way over to Thomas, who was surrounded by people. When he saw me, he waved me over. Mr. Hayes, I wanted to thank you for inadvertently shining a light on practices that needed to be addressed. I just wanted to help some neighbors and not be treated like an employee, I said. Sometimes standing up for basic reasonableness is revolutionary. He smiled. I have been watching Patricia's board for 2 years, documenting issues, but people were not ready to act. Your situation was the catalyst. Over the next few days, the neighborhood was buzzing with activity. Thomas organized a reform group focused on changing how the HOA operated. More stories came out about Patricia's management style, including some financial irregularities that Thomas had uncovered. Apparently, the HOA had been paying Patricia a management stipend of $1,500 a month, which was not disclosed in the annual budgets and was probably not allowed under the bylaws. Rebecca helped me file a formal complaint against the fine, and the board was forced to rescind it to avoid legal action. Patricia sent me a terse email stating the fine had been reviewed and dismissed due to administrative oversight, which was her way of backing down without admitting fault. The recall election was scheduled for 3 weeks out, and the campaigns were intense. Patricia and her allies tried to paint the reform group as troublemakers who wanted to eliminate all rules and turn the neighborhood into chaos. The reform group, led by Thomas, and supported by probably 60% of the active community, focused on transparency, reasonable enforcement, and treating residents with respect. I stayed mostly out of the political side, but I did agree to be interviewed by Linda Johnson, who was putting together a newsletter about the issues. I laid out everything that had happened factually, including the text messages and the absurd fine. The newsletter circulated widely, both in print and via email, and the response was overwhelmingly supportive. Meanwhile, the snow from that January storm was long gone, but the consequences kept piling up. Someone did a deep dive into the HOA finances and found that Patricia had also been expensing personal meals and gas to the HOA for community business without proper documentation. It totaled about $4,000 over 18 months. That crossed the line from bad management into potential embezzlement. Thomas, using his legal background, filed a formal complaint with the Colorado HOA regulatory body and also contacted local law enforcement. 2 weeks after the initial storm, a detective from the Denver Police Department's fraud unit contacted the HOA requesting all financial records. Patricia tried to spin it as a witch hunt, claiming that disgruntled residents were making false accusations. But the numbers did not lie, and the more people looked, the worse it got. Susan and Deborah, seeing which way the wind was blowing, both resigned from the board before the recall election, issuing statements about needing to focus on family. That left Patricia alone, and she refused to resign. The recall election went forward on a Tuesday evening in early February. The turnout was massive, well over 70% of homeowners either voting in person or by proxy. The results were not even close. Patricia was removed by an 86% vote. Thomas Wright was elected as the new president, along with 2 other reform candidates for the remaining board seats. Patricia's removal from the board did not end the saga, though. The police investigation continued, and in late February she was formally charged with theft and embezzlement of HOA funds. The amount was still being calculated, but it looked like it would exceed $10,000 once everything was accounted for. That made it a felony under Colorado law. I followed the case through local news and community updates. Patricia hired an attorney and fought the charges initially, but the evidence was overwhelming. Bank statements, credit card receipts, and testimony from other board members and vendors, all painted a clear picture of someone who had been using the HOA as a personal piggy bank. In April, 3 months after the storm that started everything, Patricia accepted a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 1 count of felony theft and 1 count of misdemeanor fraud. She was sentenced to 18 months in county jail, with the possibility of early release for good behavior, plus 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, which came out to nearly $12,000 with interest and fees. The day the sentence was announced, I was working from home as usual. Linda Johnson sent me a text with a link to the news article. I read it, felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness, and then went back to work. It was not that I wanted to see Patricia's life destroyed, but actions had consequences, and she had brought this on herself. The new HOA board under Thomas's leadership was like night and day. One of their first actions was to hire a professional snow removal service for the following winter, funded by a modest dues increase that was approved by 92% of homeowners. The volunteer program was restructured to be genuinely voluntary, with clear boundaries and no mandatory assignments. The office hours were reduced to just 1 day a week since that was all that was actually needed. And the office manager position that Patricia had held was converted to a part-time contracted role with transparent pay and oversight. Thomas also implemented monthly open forums where residents could raise concerns directly to the board without fear of retaliation. Enforcement of community rules became consistent and reasonable, focused on genuine issues that affected property values or safety rather than petty aesthetic grievances. The change in atmosphere was remarkable. As spring arrived and the last of the winter snow melted away, I found myself actually enjoying my neighborhood again. I could walk down the street without worrying about being ambushed with complaints or demands. I could chat with neighbors without it turning into HOA politics. It felt like what a community was supposed to feel like. One Saturday in May, the new board organized a neighborhood barbecue at the community center. It was entirely optional, just a chance for people to get together and enjoy the nice weather. I almost did not go, still a bit wary of community events after everything that had happened, but I figured I should at least make an appearance. The turnout was great, with probably 100 residents and their families. There were grills going, kids playing in the grass, and people actually talking and laughing together. Thomas found me near the food table and shook my hand. "Quentin, glad you could make it. I wanted to thank you again, properly this time. I still feel like I just quit a volunteer job." "You did all the heavy lifting. You stood up when it mattered. Sometimes that is all it takes to start change. How are things going for you?" "Good. Work is busy, but good. The neighborhood feels different now, better." That was the goal. We have a community again instead of a dictatorship. He paused, then added with a slight grin, "Although I have to say, we could use someone with your work ethic on the new Community Improvement Committee. It is genuinely voluntary, I promise. Maybe 2 hours a month and nobody will ever demand you shovel anything." I laughed. "Let me think about it. I am still a little traumatized." "Fair enough. The offer stands." I mingled for a while, talking to neighbors I had not really connected with before. Mrs. Chen, the elderly woman whose driveway I had cleared during the storm, found me and gave me a container of homemade cookies as a thank you. Robert Martinez introduced me to his wife, the nurse, who thanked me personally for making it possible for her to get to work that day. Several other people stopped by to chat, and I realized that while the storm and its aftermath had been stressful, something good had come from it. As the afternoon wound down and the sun started to set, I sat on a bench near the community center, watching families pack up their stuff and head home. I thought about that morning back in January, standing in my driveway at 5 a.m., reading Patricia's demanding text message. I had made a split-second decision to stand up for myself, to say that enough was enough, and it had set off a chain of events nobody could have predicted. The thing about communities is that they are only as good as the people running them and the willingness of residents to hold those people accountable. For too long, Meadowbrook had been under the thumb of someone who saw the HOA as her personal kingdom rather than a service organization. It took a blizzard, a quit, and a lot of angry neighbors to finally break that dynamic. I did not set out to be a catalyst for change. I just wanted to help some elderly neighbors and not be treated like garbage for it. But sometimes standing up for something small and reasonable ends up mattering more than you think. Sometimes saying no to unreasonable demands creates space for other people to say no to. And sometimes a community that has been afraid to speak up just needs one person to go first. A few weeks later, I was clearing some boxes out of my garage when I found my old snow shovel leaning in the corner. I picked it up, remembering all the driveways and walkways I had cleared over the past winter, and smiled. I decided to keep it ready for next season. Not because anyone was demanding I use it, not because some power-hungry board member was going to guilt me into service, but because helping neighbors who genuinely needed it felt good. The difference was in the choice. By summer, the neighborhood had settled into a comfortable rhythm. The new board published transparent financial statements showing exactly where dues money went. They created an online portal where residents could submit maintenance requests and track their status. They even organized a community yard sale that raised money for local charities. It was everything an HOA should be and nothing it should not be. I did end up joining Thomas's Community Improvement Committee, though I made it clear I would only commit to one project at a time and could drop out if it became too demanding. The first project was organizing a neighborhood watch program, which was actually useful and interesting. The second was planning a holiday lights contest for December, which sounded fun and totally optional. One evening in late June, I was walking my neighbor's dog as a favor while they were on vacation. I passed by Patricia's old house and noticed it was for sale. Apparently, the legal fees, restitution, and general scandal had forced her to sell and move away. I felt a twinge of something, maybe sympathy, maybe just sadness at how badly she had screwed up a pretty good situation. But mostly, I felt relieved. The neighborhood was in good hands now, run by people who understood that an HOA existed to serve homeowners, not the other way around. Rules were enforced fairly and reasonably. Volunteers were appreciated, not exploited, and nobody was going to demand anyone shovel walkways during a blizzard while threatening fines for refusing. I walked back to my house as the summer evening settled into night, the dog trotting happily beside me. My phone buzzed with a message from the HOA group chat, and I tensed for just a second, before remembering that things were different now. It was just Thomas posting a reminder about the upcoming neighborhood movie night, complete with details about food trucks and lawn seating. No demands, no threats, just information. I smiled and kept walking. Sometimes the best victories are the quiet ones, where life just goes back to being normal and reasonable. Where you can live in your house, help your neighbors when you want to, and not worry about power-hungry board members turning volunteering into forced labor. Where a snowstorm is just a snowstorm, not a catalyst for community warfare. The irony was not lost on me that by refusing to shovel the HOA office walkway, I had inadvertently cleared a path for real change in Meadowbrook. By watching Patricia and her board struggle with the consequences of their own unreasonable demands and corrupt practices, the community had woken up and taken control back. It was not the outcome anyone expected from a January blizzard, but it was the outcome we needed. As fall approached, and the leaves started changing colors on those tree-lined streets I had always appreciated, I found myself genuinely looking forward to winter again. Not because I enjoyed shoveling snow, nobody actually enjoys that, but because I knew that when the storms came this year, there would be professionals handling the community areas, and volunteers would be supporting neighbors out of genuine desire to help rather than coerced obligation. The reforms Thomas's board had implemented went beyond just snow removal and financial transparency. They had revised the bylaws to include term limits for board positions, mandatory annual audits, and a clear process for residents to challenge fines or decisions. They had reduced the number of rules overall, focusing only on things that genuinely affected the community rather than micromanaging every aspect of people's properties. And they had created a culture where asking for feedback was seen as strength rather than weakness. In October, the HOA held its annual meeting to review the year's activities and elect one new board member to replace someone who was moving out of state. The attendance was strong, and the mood was positive. Thomas presented the financial report, which showed the HOA in good shape, despite having to cover Patricia's embezzlement through reserves. The professional snow removal contract was explained and approved enthusiastically. And several residents stood up just to say thank you for the changes that had been made. When the topic of volunteer programs came up, I was surprised to see that participation had actually increased dramatically. Freed from Patricia's micromanagement and unreasonable demands, people were actually eager to help with community projects. There was a gardening club that maintained the entrance landscaping, a welcome committee that greeted new residents, and yes, even a supplemental snow team that helped elderly neighbors on a truly voluntary basis. Turned out that when you treated people with respect and appreciated their contributions rather than demanding and criticizing, they were happy to pitch in. As winter arrived again, almost a full year after the storm that had changed everything, I watched the first snowfall from my window with a cup of coffee in hand. It was a light dusting, nothing like that January blizzard, but it brought back memories of standing in my driveway at 5 in the morning, reading that ridiculous text message, and making a choice. That choice to quit, to refuse unreasonable demands, to stand up for basic respect and common sense, had rippled outward in ways I never anticipated. It had exposed corruption, sparked a community uprising, resulted in criminal charges, and ultimately transformed how our HOA operated. And all because I said no to shoveling a walkway that did not need shoveling for a meeting that did not need to happen during a storm that everyone else had the good sense to wait out. My phone buzzed. It was the community group chat, but instead of demands from Patricia, it was a message from Marcus, the other volunteer who had been out of town during that infamous storm. He was back and active in the community again now that things had changed. His message read, "Light snow expected tomorrow. Anyone need help with their walkways? Happy to assist elderly or disabled neighbors. Just let me know." Within minutes, several people responded with requests or offers to help. Mrs. Chen posted a sweet message saying she was all set but thanking everyone for caring. Robert Martinez offered to team up with Marcus to cover more ground. Someone else offered hot chocolate for volunteers afterward. It was the neighborhood helping itself, naturally and voluntarily, the way it should have been all along. I typed a response. I am available to help as well. Just send me addresses that need coverage. And I meant it, because now it was actually volunteering. Now it was community. Now it was neighbors helping neighbors without someone standing over us with a clipboard and threats, demanding we turn charity into unpaid labor for their personal convenience. The snow fell gently outside, coating the world in white, and I felt genuinely peaceful. The storm had passed, both literally and figuratively. What remained was a stronger community, better leadership, and the simple knowledge that standing up for yourself, even in small ways, even when it felt risky, was always worth it. Patricia was serving her sentence in county jail, probably regretting the series of choices that had led her there. Susan and Deborah had faded into the background of community life, keeping low profiles after their association with the scandal. And the rest of us were moving forward, building something better from the wreckage of what had been a toxic situation. As December arrived, bringing with it the holiday lights contest I had helped organize, the neighborhood was transformed into a winter wonderland of decoration and celebration. Houses were lit up with creative displays, families walked the streets together looking at lights, and the community center hosted hot chocolate socials. It was everything a neighborhood should be during the holidays. On Christmas Eve, I was sitting on my porch with a warm drink, enjoying the lights and the quiet, when Thomas walked by with his wife. He saw me and waved, then came up to the porch. "Quentin, just wanted to say thank you for everything this year." The lights contest was a huge success, and more importantly, you helped save this community from something that could have gotten much worse. I appreciate that, but really, I just quit a volunteer job. You are the one who did the hard work of actually fixing things. Maybe. But sometimes the hard work can only happen after someone has the courage to say enough is enough. You did that. You gave the rest of us permission to stand up too. He paused, looking around at the decorated houses and happy families. This is what Meadowbrook was supposed to be. Thank you for helping us get here. They walked on, and I sat there thinking about his words. It was true that I had not set out to be any kind of hero or activist. I had just been tired, cold, and fed up with being treated poorly. But in standing up for myself, I had inadvertently stood up for everyone else who had been dealing with the same toxic leadership. The new year came, and with it another winter storm, this one even bigger than the January blizzard that had started everything. But this time, the professional snow removal service was out in force, clearing community areas efficiently and safely. The volunteer team helped neighbors who needed it, working together without demands or pressure. And when it was done, everyone went home to their warm houses, satisfied with a job well done and appreciated for their contributions. I stood in my garage, putting away my snowblower after clearing my own driveway, and smiled. The same machine, the same winter, the same neighborhood, but everything was different now. Better, healthier, more like what a community should be. As I walked back into my house, stomping snow off my boots, I thought about the journey from that early morning text message to this moment. It had been messy, complicated, sometimes stressful, but ultimately worthwhile. Standing up to unreasonable demands had consequences, sure, but they were good consequences. Change was uncomfortable, but it was necessary. And somewhere in a county jail, Patricia Cunningham was probably regretting that she had ever sent that text message demanding I shovel her office walkway during a blizzard. If she had just been reasonable, treated volunteers with respect, and not been corrupt with HOA funds, she would still be living in her house, still be involved in the community, still be a free woman. Instead, her need for control and her willingness to abuse her position had cost her everything. I did not take pleasure in her downfall, but I did not lose sleep over it either. She had made her choices, and choices had consequences. My choice to quit had consequences too, good ones, ones that rippled through an entire community and made life better for hundreds of people. The rest of that winter passed peacefully. Storms came and went, snow fell and was cleared, life continued in its normal rhythm. The neighborhood thrived under its new leadership, attracting new residents who were drawn to the positive community atmosphere. Property values actually increased, which was ironic given Patricia's constant warnings that any change to her system would destroy home values. By the time spring returned again, bringing with it blooming trees and warming temperatures, the events of that January storm felt like ancient history. The community had moved on, healed, and grown stronger. The reforms were now just the normal way of doing things, no longer controversial but simply accepted as how a good HOA should operate. I continued my work, my life, my quiet existence in a neighborhood that now felt like home in a way it had not before. I helped with community projects when I had time and interest. I shoveled elderly neighbors' driveways when storms hit because I wanted to, not because anyone demanded it. And I lived without the constant low-level stress of wondering what absurd demand or petty fine might be coming next. 1 year after that fateful storm, I found myself at the community center for a celebration marking the anniversary of the board reforms. It was not officially about the storm or my quitting or Patricia's removal, but everyone knew that was the real reason for the gathering. Thomas gave a speech about community, respect, and the importance of good governance. Several residents shared their own stories of how the changes had improved their lives. When Thomas called me up to say a few words, I was not sure what to say. I had not prepared anything. But standing there, looking at the faces of my neighbors, I found the words. A year ago, I quit a volunteer position because I was being treated poorly. That was all I set out to do. But what happened next showed me that communities are stronger than any one person or any one corrupt board. When people come together, demand accountability, and refuse to accept abuse of power, real change happens. I am proud to live in Meadowbrook, not because our lawns are perfect or our mailboxes are the right color, but because we proved that standing up for what is right matters. Thank you all for being the kind of neighbors worth standing up for. The applause was generous, and I stepped down feeling genuinely moved. This was not about me being a hero. This was about a community finding its voice and its strength. I was just the person who happened to go first. As the evening ended and people filed out of the community center, heading home under a clear spring sky, I walked slowly back to my house. The streets were quiet, the air was warm, and everything felt right. I had lived through chaos, confrontation, and change, and come out the other side into something better. The snow shovel still sat in my garage, ready for next winter. But now, it represented something different than it had before. Not obligation or exploitation, but choice and community. The freedom to help when and how I wanted to, without demands or threats. The simple dignity of voluntary service given freely and received gratefully. That was what I had fought for without really meaning to fight at all. And that was what we had won. Not perfect governance or a perfect neighborhood, but something real and human and decent. A place where people treated each other with respect, where power was checked by accountability, and where a volunteer was actually a volunteer. As I unlocked my door and stepped inside, I took one last look at the neighborhood I had helped transform simply by refusing to be exploited. The street lights glowed softly, houses sat peacefully in the evening air, and everything was as it should be. I smiled, closed the door, and moved forward into whatever came next, knowing that I had learned an important lesson about standing up for myself and, inadvertently, for everyone else too. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is quit. Quit accepting mistreatment. Quit enabling toxic behavior. Quit pretending that unreasonable demands are reasonable just because someone in authority makes them. And sometimes, that simple act of quitting becomes the first step toward real change, the kind that lasts and matters and makes life better for everyone involved. The storm had come and gone. I had quit and watched them struggle. And from that struggle came something stronger and better than what had existed before. That was the real story, the one that mattered, the one that turned a blizzard and a resignation into a community transformation. It was not the story I set out to create, but it was the one I was proud to have played a part in, however accidentally.